So, hello again. Thank you for joining. Sorry about the slight delay. We are 3 minutes late because we had so many questions just now in the session with Jan Dupal from the Czech Component Authority. But now this session will also be very interesting, and I'm very happy to have two experts with me today. We want to talk about not only what can we do right, but also what can go wrong, basically. What are the hidden costs of EUDR compliance if we don't get it right, basically. And we will look at this from different aspects. And with me today I have, on the one hand, Constanze Schweidmann from the global law firm CMS. Hi, Constanze. Thank you for joining us today.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
CMS is a global law firm that also partners with Live.io for supply legality checks in our EUDR solution TradeAware. CMS employs 6,300 lawyers in 47 countries, which I looked up, which is very impressive. Constanze, I think you're joining us from Sweden.
From the Berlin office.
From the Berlin office. Okay, nonetheless, our audience is international. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
And then with us also we have Rob Shaw from PFC, the program for the endorsement of forest certification, which everybody knows. I think it's a leading global alliance of national forest certification system that promotes sustainable forest management through independent third-party certification. So you probably know them from your coffee cup that you get from the bakery that has the PFC label, which shows you this was the wood that went into the cup was ethically and sustainably sourced. Thanks, Rob, for joining us today.
Good morning. Thanks, Andreas. Good to be here.
All right. So yeah, this will be interactive. So it will be a panel, but still in the end, we will have some time for your questions. So ideally, you, the audience, ask them via the Q&A feature on the panel on the right-hand side. The session will also be recorded. We will show the recording. And I think with that, we can jump in and get started. So my first question would be to Constanze. So to start it, what are the biggest challenges you see that your clients currently face with regards to the EUDR and getting ready for EUDR compliance?
Yeah, that's a good first question, I would say. So first of all, good morning, everyone, again. As Andreas already mentioned, we are quite a global law firm, so we have not only clients from all over the world, but also deal with their suppliers who are actually from all over the world. And if I just base my question on what our clients, so not only companies from Europe, but mainly companies from Europe are facing at the moment is still the uncertainty, I would say. You all know that there were new FAQ and guidelines released last week, which everyone anticipated, of course, and we read through that. And there has been some clarification, of course, but still several things are unclear, and this especially goes for the benchmarking, I would say, which is going to be released hopefully until the end of June. So everyone is really anticipating that. But the real problem here is that, of course, all of you who are attending here today are actually preparing at the moment. But how do you prepare if you don't know what the countries you're sourcing from, how they will be categorized? So that's really a problem we're facing, that there's still not everything clear, even though this is the time to prepare. So that's why we are trying to anticipate as much as we can, try to work as much as we can with the questions and answers we have. And what I also have to say is that obviously it's the same for every company preparing, so everyone sits in the same boat, so to say. And I think, of course, you can still prepare, but that's at least the main challenge I see from the European countries. And then if I talk about the suppliers outside the EU, which the companies have to onboard to be EUDR reliant, is that we really see that many suppliers outside of Europe still don't really know what they are supposed to do, what documents, what requirements the EUDR has. So that's really the task of the companies in Europe to have their suppliers on board and really help them understand what is required under the EUDR.
And this also, I mean, but this also doesn't change as much with the country benchmarking, right? So if you have to choose between hope for the best and prepare for the worst, maybe you should take the pessimistic approach. Maybe, if you don't know, under ambiguity and half a year time.
Yeah, I mean, still companies have to prepare, so it really doesn't matter. After all, the EUDR comes into place from end of the year. So yeah, even though we have these challenges, we have to deal with them.
Yeah. Rob, you are the head of standards and integrity at PFC, and I know there's also some uncertainty about this, and we will get into the EUDR voluntary modular standard in a way, but just to clarify, because I know this comes up quite often as a question around certification schemes, not only PFC, but also FSC, then SRSPO and similar ones. If I am a certificate holder of one of these certification schemes, am I automatically EUDR compliant as a company or not?
Yes, thanks for the question, Andreas. Yeah, I obviously can't speak for FSC or the other schemes, but they all do operate in similar ways. The EU guidance document, which is available on the EUDR website, makes it clear that voluntary certification schemes play an important role in risk management and they help towards compliance, but however, they're not a standalone guarantee of legal compliance. And it's very important for companies to understand that. If you are an operator or a trader and you have the operator responsibilities, then the legal compliance rests with you, and therefore, if you are an EU registered company, you can be subject to quite heavy penalties if you get this wrong. Having said that, given that EUDR is an evolution of EUTR in the timber industry in particular, so this isn't exactly new for the timber and risk commodity of all the risk commodities. The monitoring authorities in the EU countries have become quite familiar with voluntary certification schemes, particularly the global credible ones, such as PEFC. And so the staff operating, they know the value of voluntary certification, and they understand that it does help with going towards legal compliance. So I would suggest that if people are not certified, then they seriously look into becoming certified, because it does help with frictionless trade and credibility at the inspection level. And I think also the monitoring authorities are having to staff up and get resources. And there isn't just timber and rubber in the risk commodities, there's all the other risk commodities. And so they'll be focusing their efforts, no doubt, on the highest risks and the newest features. And so in that respect, the timber industry does have a slight advantage, although we do have our integrity challenges as well, obviously.
So maybe summarizing, it doesn't solve it. Being a certificate holder doesn't mean automatically you are EUDR compliant from the start, but you can view it as a head start into getting compliant, maybe. Because
absolutely, yes. And then the standards that we've been developing over the last 2 years, which we can expand on, are very much focused on aligning with the EUDR. So if you're following the standard, then obviously you're doing the right thing. So
maybe you can get into that a little bit, what PFC is doing there.
Yes, certainly, yes. So on the chain of custody front, we published our EUDR modular standard last year, and this sits on top of our main chain of custody standard. We have to go through an accreditation process, and in the European accreditation area, or also known as the EA area, this is coming to a conclusion at the end of this month. And so certification bodies then gain accreditation, and so they'll be rolling this product out in the second half of the year. This is already available in the rest of the world outside the EA, and so we have certification bodies such as Preferred by Nature are already offering this service in the rest of the world. So a certified organization which has a PEFC chain of custody can ask for a scope extension from their certification body, and then what they have to do is align their management systems, train their staff, get their data collection ready, and then apply to be audited. So the third-party auditors who are independent will then be checking whether the company is meeting our standard, and our standard has taken all the relevant words and phrases from EUDR and embedded them into our standards. So that's on the chain of custody side. And then similarly, on the forest management side, we are going through an alignment process at the moment, country by country. We have 48 national endorsed systems around the world for forest management, and our website will be updated over the next months and into 2026, on which certified forests around the world will be EUDR aligned. Because that process takes a while, it doesn't mean that that material cannot leave those forests and come into the supply chain. It just takes a different route through our due diligence system in our EUDR module.
Okay, understood. So that basically so incorporating that standard also helps you to be POC certified and comply with EUDR. So you have sort of, it sounds like it's also a bit of potentially an efficiency gain if you want to do both, basically.
Yes, indeed. So because we've also aligned our forest management international benchmark with the EUDR wording, in roughly a year's time, we will have most of our forest management systems EUDR aligned. So the timber and the forest products coming out of those forests will take a quicker route through a due diligence system. And if the supply chain has taken our EUDR chain of custody module, then there will be what we call PEFC-EUDR claims flowing through the system, and all the companies will be operating to a common standard in terms of the way they do due diligence, the way they then prepare information to pass it down the supply chain. And the big challenge, of course, which is where LiveEO and others come in, is how technology can support that data exchange, which is the big new thing in EUDR.
Yeah, of course. Maybe speaking about shortcuts or potential shortcuts, maybe, or not shortcuts, Constanze, so some companies are looking to shift liability to their suppliers through legal agreements. Do you think that is a practical method to become EUDR compliant?
To have the short answer, no, because the EUDR clearly says that after all, everyone that submits a due diligence statement, be it an operator or trader, after all is responsible for that due diligence statement and for submitting that due diligence statement. So it's not a free way to say, okay, great, I can just put the burden on someone else. That does not work. But of course, it can be one potential bit of the broader compliance system. We're also helping clients with drafting these kind of statements. They were especially common in the beginning of the EUDR preparation. And right now, I feel like they become a bit less relevant, not only because you can simply cannot shift the burden, but also because the FAQ and guidelines say a bit more what you need from your suppliers, and it feels like it's becoming a bit less, especially when it comes to that ascertaining that due diligence has been conducted by the upstream supply chain. There you, well, not in all cases, but in several cases, you will only need the reference and a reference number and due diligence reference and verification number. Sorry. So yeah, it's becoming less relevant, I would say. But on the other hand, of course, it can be helpful if you as your company, you really want to be compliant and want to check every single piece of information from the upstream supply chain, which you usually are not required to if there has been due diligence statements submitted before, which you can rely on. But in specific cases, because you don't trust your supplier fully, or because you have a feeling that there's something wrong and you need to request more information, for these cases, these kind of agreements can be helpful, because then at least you have some legal base to request this kind of information. But after all, it can only be a part of the broader compliance system. And it really depends on the relationship between the companies and the suppliers, I would say.
So basically, if I understand correctly, so these agreements, they help with information sharing and collaboration in the supply chain, maybe. And in the new guidance document that came out a week ago, it seems like the ascertaining that due diligence has been carried out previously becomes a little bit easier. But basically, if you are the organization that has to carry out the due diligence, then the legal burden is on your organization if you're the operator.
Yeah, exactly. That's correct. And also maybe what can be helpful with these kind of legal basis is that the information cannot be shared through the traces system. That's what the Commission made clear last week in the guidelines. So how, as a downstream company, for example, in the downstream supply chain, you will access these kind of information if they cannot be shared through traces? Well, then you need to come up with some kind of different way of sharing these kind of information, and that could be something you could regulate in these kinds of agreements.
Yeah, interesting. Then maybe one more shortcut we can talk about. So assuming you're the organization that has to perform the due diligence and you want to do it properly, we know that sometimes, especially for the legal risk assessment, there's the trend to say we just let an AI run over all documents we receive from suppliers in all countries, and it will flag things. What is your view on this as a human lawyer?
Well, I guess that we should be open to these kind of technologies, and they can be a first step to organizing information and getting an overview of what could be potential problems, especially if you have very, very complex supply chains with hundreds of suppliers. But after all, you cannot, as you cannot shift the burden on someone else through an agreement, you can also not shift the burden on any AI tool, really. So after all, it makes sense that there's someone who takes all the information together, because that's what the EUDR requires. After all, there's no clear cut of saying, okay, if you do this and this, you are EUDR compliant. This simply does not work like that. Yeah. But it really always depends on the complexity of the supply chain, of the risk of mixing, and to take into account these risks with the documents you have is something that I could believe would be a bit difficult for an AI tool, and just also not risking that because of one document which might be not complete, you risk of losing a supplier because your AI tool says, well, it's not EUDR compliant.
Of course, yeah. This side of false positives is often overlooked in general.
Well, you know that at IPO,
yes,
so
because
that's
it's the same
where you come into place, which is so important that you have this wider look at things and don't just look at the available maps, right?
Exactly. So yeah, regarding deforestation detection, our product is very, very accurate and helps you not to rely on data that tells you your suppliers are non-compliant when in reality they are. But we'll speak more about that in a later session. So a question for Rob. So having seen which shortcuts are not possible, in your experience, how long do you think it really takes for to prepare a supply chain and internal processes in an organization for EUDR readiness?
I would say 6 months is a realistic timescale. Excuse me. It obviously depends where you sit in the supply chain. And the larger multinational companies have already been thinking and working quite hard on this in terms of investing in systems and mapping supply chains. But wherever you sit in the supply chain, you need time to map your suppliers, identify which suppliers you might have a challenge working with. And that very much depends on which countries you're sourcing from and the complexity in those different countries. And then, of course, there then is the technology question about whether to buy a solution, an end-to-end solution such as the LiveEO one, or whether you want to invest in your own software and then maybe buy components in from suppliers. So that depends on the size of the company and which markets it's feeding. So given that we're now getting towards the end of April, I would encourage everybody to start now, if you haven't started already, and resist the temptation to think that EUDR will go away, because if it doesn't, you will not have the luxury of time come September, October to try and do this very quickly. So yeah, I would say start now.
Start now, 6 months, yeah, end of April now. Time is running out a little bit. How maybe Constanze, so how does CMS basically help clients be EUDR compliant, and how do you, maybe you can also say what about your collaboration with LiveEO on this?
Yeah, sure. So we're a full service law firm at CMS, which makes it easier for us to adapt to these kind of requirements like the EUDR, because as you said before, Andreas, we have our lawyers in almost all parts of the world, and where we don't have our own offices, we have partner offices we work with. So that really means that we can advise clients on every aspect of the EUDR. That kind of started with the application when the EUDR first came on everyone's side, that we advise clients if they're really really in the Annex 1 with their products, for example, and map the supply chains together with them. Of course, we also advise them on very specific legal questions they might have depending on their structure in their company, because that is something I wouldn't have imagined before, that there are really so many specific questions which you can't imagine depending on the way companies are sourcing, companies are working together with others. Like it's really quite a complex system. So we always try to get the best out of these questions, and then of course our collaboration with LiveEO is kind of a unique solution on the market, because we bring together the technical part and the legal part in one solution, and try to make it as easy as possible for the clients, which means that LiveEO does the risk assessment regarding the deforestation by their solution, and we cover the legal part, meaning the risk assessment and risk mitigation, if it's necessary, after all, of the suppliers. So, for example, there's a big company in the food industry which has many commodities in their portfolio. They have 500 suppliers, let's say, from all over the world. Then this solution would help them be EUDR compliant, because the suppliers of that specific company would be onboarded onto the TradeAware platform of LiveEO, and then on the platform the risk assessment regarding deforestation would take place. Then the suppliers would also fill out the questionnaire which we developed at CMS based on the the legal requirements of the EUDR, which suppliers would then answer. Also upload the required documents, of course, because without them, it's hard to do the risk assessment. And then we at CMS would look at the risk assessment regarding deforestation, take together the questionnaire, the answers, and the documents, and then look at it in detail, all at once, so to say. What I said before, that there's actually a human, maybe me, someone else from my team, behind it, and look at the specific supplier and all the documents and answers. Also about the kind of supply chain we're looking at, the sourcing country, and then we would categorize that supplier if we consider it EUDR compliant, if we consider that there's a risk of circumvention of the EUDR, so that there needs to be risk mitigation, or we consider that there's mainly no information about the supplier at all, so it would to even conduct the risk mitigation. That result is then uploaded on the TradeAware platform, so our clients could directly see it, and then of course follow up with that specific supplier, and in the best way make it green, so it's a EUDR compliant supplier. That's how we work together with LiveEO, basically.
I think, yeah, this ties nicely back to Rob, what you said earlier. Basically, it needs to be software can help organizing and automating. We have one solution for this that we offer, but generally, EUDR needs to be it needs to be a systematic approach. You have to build up a system in the organization to successfully do it, especially if you have a complex supply chains or many suppliers, large volumes.
Yeah, that's for sure, because otherwise things will get lost, and you have to secure the documents and the references for the EUDR as well, in case there are controls. So yeah, it would be a good way of having a system behind it and not just filling out an Excel table, maybe.
Yeah, it would be a very large, complex Excel table in many scenarios.
And then just Andreas, just
yes.
Picking up on a couple of questions related to this in the chat. Somebody is asking about who is an operator. Well, an operator is the person who imports the material into the EU if it's coming from outside the EU. So they have to be an EU registered company. I understand, maybe Constance can confirm that. And therefore they get the customs release when the material arrives, for example, at a dockside at a port. If you are not the operator, then if you're outside the EU, you are supplying the relevant information to that operator, who will then upload the due diligence statement. And there's another question about aggregating in excess. Well, I mean, obviously this relates to risk. If you're buying from a country, for example, like Sweden, and you're buying from southern Sweden, you may be able to just declare in excess 1 million tons of material that you're going to buy from forests that you know. If you're buying from other countries like Malaysia and Indonesia, where individual trees are being felled in the forest, that's much more tricky and much more complex. So again, picking up on another question, there is no one size fits all checklist to deal with due diligence. It very much depends on where you're buying from and what the risks are. Sorry for the interjection.
No, of course. No, I was just we moved to questions anyway, but yeah, about declaration access, like you said, basically you can also have okay, I don't know if that's actually possible, but say you have one due diligence statement for everything, no matter where you source it from. But the problem is, if one of these suppliers is non-compliant, the whole thing is non-compliant. So that's why declaration access is tricky, as you said. Because
if I sorry.
Sure.
Go ahead.
No, please.
Because I just saw a question in the chat, which I think is which we should address. There was the question that how do we address the relevant legislation in the countries of production, and that's actually a good question, because it's obviously hard for European companies which have to submit a due diligence statement to understand if, let's say, there was a example from Uruguay. I think if the Uruguayan laws were complied with. That's where our colleagues in the relevant legislation, relevant countries, sourcing countries come in, because they can really tell us what would be required under Uruguayan, Colombian, Kenyan law to, for example, prove that you have a license to use that kind of land, because that's obviously a bit of a problem, because there's no list of documents or legislation for every country yet. I'm not sure if that even will be published at any case by the Commission. So it really depends on the specific legislation of the country. So you don't have one list, which is why it's so important that we contact our lawyers in that specific countries, which we can, because we have a wide network, and that works really well. Just for Uruguay, a couple of weeks ago, I contacted my colleagues there, and they were really fast in giving me a list of relevant legislation that supplier would have to comply with, for example.
So that, yeah, there's a scale benefit on the lawyer side, basically. Yeah. Maybe one question that came up several times about the new guidance, I think. So the question is risk assessment performed on annual basis or with every shipment? And I think there might be confusion between risk assessment and due diligence submission. Maybe, perhaps, I don't know. Can you?
I can. You go first, Rob. Whatever.
Yeah, my take on it is, and although the FAQs are still very new and I need to read it all in detail, is I think there was a new FAQ saying that it was possible to submit a due diligence statement for a whole period. However, this will only be practically possible if the supply base is stable and the operator or the trader submitting this due diligence statement knows their supply base and can include all the supply, or even do a declaration in excess. So it's back to risk management here again. You can't just sit back and assume that something you submit on the 1st of January will see you through to the end of December if your supply base is changing, if you're sourcing multiple products from multiple countries. So some of the attempts to simplify, which the EU are very keen to do, they need to be read very carefully, because again, the legislation hasn't changed. These are just FAQs to support the legislation. So sorry, Constance, maybe you want to add something there.
Oh, no worries. No, I absolutely agree that I'm also wondering how in actual real life that would work, and if that could apply to anyone, because that means that, for example, if you would only submit a due diligence statement regarding that specific product once a year, that in January, where you import the first time, you know that within the year you have X amount of kilograms of cocoa, for example, you're going to import into the EU from the same country of production, from the same places, from the same suppliers. So that would be interesting if that would actually apply. But that's correct. That's how the Commission said it could work. And if within the year you realize that the amount of the product or commodity you're importing exceeds that limit which you included in the due diligence statement, then you would have to submit a new due diligence statement. And the due diligence system within the companies, meaning how to map the suppliers, for example, and how to conduct the risk assessment regarding each supplier you're sourcing from, is supposed to be conducted once a year. Yeah.
Okay. There's a very specific question about Northern Ireland. When should we expect a confirmation whether EUDR applies to Northern Ireland? I maybe Rob, you know something about this? I don't. Not.
I'm based in Scotland, and I've previously worked all over the UK, and I've been asked this question in almost every webinar I've attended.
Oh.
The only answer that I can give is that the UK timber industry, various representatives have approached the UK government, who have pointed them to the executive in Northern Ireland for an answer. And as far as I'm aware, no answer has yet been forthcoming. My assumption is that because Northern Ireland is inside the EC trading zone, then EUDR will apply to Northern Ireland. Obviously, it shares a land border with Southern Ireland and is in quite a unique position. But as far as I'm aware, there hasn't been a definitive UK government answer yet on this. So apologies. All I'm saying is I don't know.
Okay, that's an answer also. And there's another written question. So as a company, we import products from China into the UK only, therefore not affected by EUDR, but our customers sometimes send the stock they purchase from us into the EU. They are then going to ask us for the due diligence statements, geolocations. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And I know a lot of UK-based companies who do subsequent importing into the EU or into Southern Ireland, which is obviously an EU country. China is a particularly interesting case right now because there is still international discussions about will China release geolocation data. So that's an interesting question. But I think the FAQs are quite clear that if material arrives without geolocation data and then it can't be sent along the supply chain and eventually ends up in the European Union, then it will not be compliant. So if you are in a third country and you are importing and then exporting either directly or via an operator, you will need to be prepared to provide all the relevant EUDR compliant information. Otherwise, your shipments will risk being rejected.
Yeah. Yeah, this question also came up after the keynote, and I think it's nobody has the answer, but the answer, which part of the answer is clear, is that you need the geolocations basically. Yeah. Constanze, maybe this is sort of a follow-up to what you just said about the different local legislations. Do you expect the EU Commission to provide a list of relevant laws in every single country in the world so companies can check legality without using external legal services?
That's a good question. To be honest, I don't know. I've heard before that there will be some kind of list released by the Commission, but I'm not sure if they're going to list. I just simply cannot imagine that there will be a list of every single law companies have to comply with regarding the different countries of the world. But
Yeah.
at least I heard that there will be some kind of guidance on that, but how that will exactly look like, I'm not sure about.
Yeah. And also, I don't know if it completely frees one from needing legal services potentially, because if I think about, like, I have the book of laws, the civic code or whatever in my house, and still sometimes I don't know what to do with it, not being a lawyer. Okay, so then going to the next question. If due diligence is done for import, it's just a matter of time. Okay, hang on. If due diligence is done for import, it's just a matter of time that all goods in Europe will be EUDR compliant. Why then operators and traders need to be compliant also for export from EU? This will reduce complexity without compromising legality. Honestly, I'm not sure this is the case, that every product will be automatically EUDR compliant, because you can have changing supply chains, sourced from new companies that previously didn't import into Europe. So maybe that answers that. Okay, then another question about CMS. So basically, your assessment questionnaire for suppliers for legality checks, is it standard for all suppliers or varies it based on the country of location?
Yeah, we have one set of questionnaire, but obviously the questions regarding the country of the legislation of the country of production depends on the country of production. So we cannot simply apply the same, and we can also not apply the same kind of risk assessment for every country, because as you know, there are also criteria regarding complexity of the supply chain, not only but also bribery, for example, how likely there's a risk of bribery. And obviously it's a different case if we're sourcing from let's say France than some other countries outside of the European Union. So there, regarding the risk assessment, we have to be country specific, of course. Yeah.
Okay. There's a timber question, an interesting one, I think. So the question is, we purchase machines shipped in wooden crates from Japan, yeah, so basically I think this is the starting point. How far back do we need to go in the supply chain? Do we need to look at the timber used? I think this is an interesting question, because I know how it is for packaging, paper packaging, but I don't know how it is for wooden crates. Maybe you can.
Yeah, I can take this. There are some specific FAQ questions on packaging used to protect other goods, for example, washing machines or machinery. And there's also specific FAQ questions and answers on pallets. I see there's also a question on pallet. So in general terms, and I would encourage everybody to go to the EU FAQs and read them, if the packaging is merely there to support the product, then my understanding is it does not need to be EUDR compliant. However, if you are manufacturing packaging cases made out of wood or timber, and those are your products, so in other words, you're providing them into the marketplace to then be used to protect other goods, then they are a product, therefore they fall into line. And it's the same with the pallet. If the pallet is being used to support the transport of an item, then in certain cases it will not come into scope. However, the production of wooden pallets and the trade of wooden pallets as a standalone product is captured into the scope. And this is all explained in great detail in the FAQs.
Okay.
And by the way,
Sorry,
Constance, yeah, go ahead, yeah.
At least that's some kind of clarity. And apparently with the change of the Annex 1, which which the Commission is actually working on right now, this could also apply to catalogs. Is it that right word? Yeah, or flyers, for example, or pieces of information that
like auxiliary paper.
Yeah, so everything you provide together with that relevant product or commodity does not fall under the EUDR. But as Rob correctly said, everything else that is supplied on its own will fall under the EUDR. Yeah.
Okay, I realize we are already out of time. I need to get a little bit better at this, but thank you so much for answering all the questions and for the nice conversation. Quick summarize, certifications help getting started. You have to trust your suppliers or perform due diligence. If you want to do it right, perform due diligence. There are not so many shortcuts. It needs to be, EUDR implementation needs to be systematic. Legal EUDR expertise compounds with larger law firms that have cases in many different countries. Software helps organizing the whole thing and automating, and the best time to get ready is yesterday. Perfect.
Yeah, it's a good
summary. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.